One day while walking I found something, and that something just happened to be a processor, by a bin of all things. The processor in question was an Intel Pentium 4 630. Launched in Q4 of 2005, it was produced on the 90nm node. It's complete with one core clocked in at 3 GHz and has 2 threads thanks to its hyperthreading. Of course, next up we had to clean it, so it'd be in a usable state. Due to the shit state it was in, we soon realised water wasn't going to be enough, so we opted for some solvent spray and a comprehensive cleaning with earbuds, which actually worked pretty well. I only have one LGA 775 board to pair it with, so we'll be using that. It's also going to be paired with 4GB of DDR2 clocked in at 800MHz. Not too bad, but still the Pentium 4 relies on a quick clock speed of the memory in order to perform at its best. We're also going to be pairing it with my best GPU available, my AMD Radeon R9 285. We'll be using Windows 7 64-bit so that all programs will work, and the full 4GB of RAM is usable by the operating system. Powered of course by a Corsair TX power supply, which I usually use for testing components, and I feel it will be needed for the parts we're using here. And now for the moment of truth. Would the CPU actually post? And yes, in fact it did. Now that was set up, let's get on with some tests. First up, general web browsing works fine with all sites loading quickly as well as in the right format. A nice experience if all you needed the CPU for was basic office work. YouTube was even quick to load, with no ad blocking service running. However, video streaming was hindered to 480p to run correctly, and even then we were still dropping a few frames as the experience was really less than subpar. However, after a quick bit of googling, also done on the machine, we found this add-on called H.264ify, which allowed us to run 480p with no frames being dropped, as well as 720p in simpler videos. This is due to Flash being able to take advantage of hardware acceleration from the graphics card, and removing 60fps playback, which the Pentium 4 really struggled with. Next up, this was very surprising, I decided to unzip a 1.5GB file that I'd usually do on my main PC and then transfer across to the PCs I'm testing. However, with this Pentium 4, I decided to let the Pentium have a go, and it actually managed to decompress a 2GB file in only 2 minutes. But this got me thinking, what about editing? Can we do that on a processor found on the street? Well, let's just say that raw 1080p footage with transitions and effects will completely peg usage at 100%, and will return you with a less than admirable experience which you can see going on in the background. However, when we opted for using proxy files, which are downsampled to 480p, we can see that editing becomes a much more pleasant experience with effects being shown in real time and general basic editing being very much possible, something that I wasn't expecting from such an old and cheap chip. However, some heavy effects did slow down the usage, but not to the stage that it was unbearable like before, and you'd really have to push a lot of these effects to reach this stage. You may be on YouTube, but that doesn't mean you're coming here to learn how to make content with what you find on the floor, so let's get on to some gaming benchmarks. Up first with Grand Theft Auto 5, which is running at low in DirectX 11 mode. We saw returns of 8 FPS averages with minimums of 6 FPS. The input lag we got from attempting to run in this game made it completely unplayable, and I struggled to really just do anything, but at least it started, which is more than I expected from a chip just found on the floor. Counter-Strike Go, running with low settings in DirectX 8 mode, returned us with averages of around 15 frames per second, which we would see go down to lows of 9 FPS at the very worst. Single digits are not very playable in this game, and as CSGO's got more bloated in recent years, playing this on a Pentium 4 was not the worst I've had to suffer through, but still, it wasn't ideal. Skyrim up next was a very large surprise. Running the game with low settings at 1080p, we saw the game average 28 frames per second, with dips down to 8 frames per second at the very worst of times. This is of course when the game was very heavy and combat occurred, so not something that would happen very often unless you were aiming to get in fights a lot in this game. With a bit more tweaks you could probably get a better experience from what I've seen, and at least for me I'd class the game as being quite playable. Older titles such as Half-Life 2 are flawless, running with averages of 48 frames per second and minimums of only 26 frames per second, in one of the most physics heavy areas. This is one of the highest possible settings with 2x MSAA and HDR on. Basic indie titles such as Kerbal Space Program returns us with averages of 30 frames per second when only using smaller vessels. I'm sure larger ones could have caused issues, but for the vast part of the game, the CPU was keeping up nicely, and this would have been the case in many older titles or newer indie releases. Even the lows weren't too bad, with minimums hitting around 20 frames per second at this stage of the game. So was a CPU that was found on the floor usable in 2017? I'd say so for newer indie titles and older titles that can power through them well. Newer, more demanding titles such as Grand Theft Auto 5 and CSGO will definitely cause an issue, but it's a 12-year-old processor that wasn't even high-end back in the day. The fact that it can even hold up in some titles today is astonishing. Thank you very much for watching, good night! And thank you very much to our now 2 Patreon donators. Thanks to you, I've budgeted in some new videos that will be coming along shortly. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and thank you very much for watching again.